So when somebody says, define yourself, I think of myself as somebody who is community engaged and about helping make things better around them. It sounds, I suppose, a little altruistic, but it's the way I think of myself.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Lomitech, and sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, and Birthright Excel. Have you ever played video games or heard of the Xbox? Well, today we're going to be talking to the person who founded the Xbox. Meet Robbie Bach, author, speaker, and civic engineer, Xbachs LLC. Robbie is best known for founding and leading the team that created the Xbox. Today, he is an entertaining storyteller and catalyzing voice who writes books and speaks to audiences on leadership, creativity, strategy, and civic issues. During his 22 years at Microsoft, Robbie worked in various marketing and business management roles, including supporting the successful launch and expansion of Microsoft Office and leading the creation and development of the Xbox business. Then, as Microsoft's president of the Entertainment and Devices division, he was responsible for the company's worldwide gaming, music, video, phone, and retail sales businesses until he retired in 2010. The Watts Insurrection is his first novel. For more information, you can visit the website. Robbie Bach, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. It is such an honor. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Michael. Good to see you.
Robbie, I'm really excited to talk about so many different things. For 22 years, you were with Microsoft as president of entertainment and services worldwide, one of the founding members of the Xbox team, and seeing it through. And I cannot wait to hear about this experience and working with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, but then turned to a civic engineer and author and a speaker and a novelist and a storyteller. And so I'm really excited to talk also about creativity and how that goes back to your time at Microsoft and,
right.
and how what that means, about you and what sort of your journey is like and how you perceive, your professional and personal journey yourself. And so it's going to be a really fun conversation, Robbie. Thank you very, very much for being here. How do you define yourself, Robbie?
Well, I think of myself as somebody who has always been committed to community and civics and what's going on in the environment around me. And I, of course, I went and did what you would think of as a traditional professional career. I went to business school. I went to work at Microsoft. I did all of those things. But I've always felt a calling back to what's going on in our community and civics and how we make things better around us every day. And even when I was at Microsoft, I felt like there were things I was able to do there that helped make that happen. So that's been a constant in my life for a long time. So when somebody says, define yourself, I think of myself as somebody who is community engaged and about helping make things better around them. It sounds, I suppose, a little altruistic, but it's the way I think of myself.
Well, I'm excited to unravel that piece, as we also talk about your experiences, in the professional world. Sure. And what you learned there. Take me back to Microsoft. So, the obvious question, the founding of Xbox and leading the team and working with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, a lot to unpack, but how did it all start?
Well, this all got started really through a series of teams that were exploring whether we should be entering the video game space. And they were doing that on their own with no guidance from anyone, frankly. And that's often how these things get started. We were at an executive staff retreat. Bill discovered that this work was going on. He decided it was important to go meet with them because of what Sony was doing with PlayStation 2. From that, Bill said, hey, I think there's a technical approach here that works. He asked Steve Ballmer, who then asked me and a guy named Rick Thompson to go figure out whether there was a business model there. And at the end of that year, so that was about a 7-month period, at the end of that year, they approved Xbox. We had 20 people and we had 18 months and we said, go.
Now, what as you position yourself to lead this team and you're going and you're saying, okay, we have 18 months. How do you even measure yourself? What is sort of the the KPI that you set for this console that is going to be, later on taking over the world by storm?
Well, you'll laugh at this. I speak about this all the time. You'd think at that point we'd have this detailed strategy with everything sort of orchestrated and figured out. But the fact of the matter is we kind of had two roughly what I'll call KPIs. One was ship before the holiday of 2001. So that's our 18-month target. Got to ship by then, otherwise we're irrelevant. And two, the explosions have to look really great. And everything else was just get it done.
Wow.
And, it's not the right way to run a railroad. It's not the right way to run a business. But when you're going from 20 people to 2,000 people in 18 months, you just run hard and fast. And that's what we did.
We have to pause on this exact moment. Going from 20 people to 2,000 people, and now I'm looking at this from a leadership perspective. What is that like? What is it like to grow from, what is it, 100x?
Yeah, I can't even do the math. It was, truthfully, it was the worst 18 months of my professional life.
Wow.
The job completely consumed me. It consumed the team. We were working, 18 hours a day. And I was sort of, you struggle with your personal life, you struggle with your family. And every day was sort of a firefight against the challenges of that day. And not being strategy-led was super hard. And, somehow through sheer will, we got to the end and shipped the product. But it's not the right way to do it. And clearly, I failed. I was the leader of that team. And there's an element of failure there for sure. And, I've reflected on that. And when we went to do the second version of Xbachs, we did it completely differently.
Wow. So can you go into that a little bit more detail? So what changed from a leadership perspective that you learned from the first version to the second version that either made you a better leader or a better product?
Yeah, I think, we made two fundamental changes. One, we decided that we had to be strategy led. And so we stepped back and said, what's the strategy for the second version of Xbox? And we created this thing called the 3P framework, which is something I use still to this day in all the strategy work that I do. And it basically says in 3 pages, tell me the purpose of the project, 1 sentence, the 5 principles you're going to use to manage and operate the team, and the 5 priorities you're going to pursue to be successful. Purpose, principles, priorities, 3 pages. Now, it turns out you think that's easy. Writing that in 3 pages turns out to be incredibly difficult. But we struggled through that and got it done. And it did 2 things for us. One, by being strategy led, we were able to get the team organized and enable decisions to be made much further down in the organization. That was super important. And the second thing it did, the principles really helped us organize the culture of the group. The first version of Xbox had no Xbox culture. It was a mosh pit of cultures from all the different places we hired people. It was super difficult to manage and was just messy. The second version, we had Team Xbox. And that team was incredibly talented individually, but powerful as a group. And made the second version. I worked, frankly, just as hard on the second version as I did on the first version. But Xbox 360 was a joy to build. The original Xbox was a complete pain in the butt and really hard.
But Robbie, was there even hope to be able to design the first Xbox with the same mentality? Because I'm thinking of it like as a startup, and you're building this MVP. You're figuring out what the hell does it mean to even build a video game console. Were you looking back? Would it have been possible to create a Team Xbox for version 1 without experimenting and going through the burning of these 18 months?
I've thought about that a lot, and I've tried to give myself a pass as a leader, but ultimately, I really can't. Look, it was easier to have Xbox 360 be more organized. There's no question about that. But if we had done just a few simple fundamentals the first time around, if we had created just the simplest of outlines of a strategy, if we'd had a little bit of discussion about how we wanted to work together as a team, We could have made that so much easier. Now, the difficulties of the technology and getting everything done on time and all those kinds of things, that would have all remained. You can't wish any of that away, but you can make the process of working together way better. And I as a leader, I just wasn't disciplined enough to make that happen. And we did a much better job of it collectively with the second version.
Now, obviously, I can assume that, growing so quickly the team, both in the first team, in the first version, but then continuing with a big team in the second version, you have to go from really detail-oriented management to then extremely high level and overlooking a grand strategy, right? How does that work from a leadership perspective? How are you able to navigate through these difficult transitions?
Well, the best part for me is that I was more a natural leader in the second phase than I was in the first phase. Okay. I have this leadership theory that I call explorers, pioneers, and settlers. And there are some people who are explorer leaders, and they're just out to find things, and they're really good at that. And then there's other people who are pioneers who, once something's been discovered, they're great at creating it into something. Steve Jobs was a pioneer, right? I mean, he was just really great at creating things. Bill Gates, in many respects, was a pioneer. And then there are settlers. And these are people, which I say proudly, I'm a settler. I'm about scaling things. Yes. And so once we got to the second version, we were already finding things. And my skill set was to scale it. How do we take that team and supersize it? How do we make the business significantly bigger? How do we drive profitability? And so in many respects, I was the wrong leader for the first version because I'm not a pioneer, nor am I an explorer. And I was the right leader for the second version. And, that's just something you figure out after the fact, I suppose. Well, thank you for, making my life better through the Xbox. I obviously enjoyed it a lot. And so I can only imagine, the trying to cope with this idea of the impact that you had in leading this team and building this console and thinking, about, a worldwide phenomena of gaming and entertainment in a different way. And I'm really curious about this transition to being a novelist and civic engineer. So retiring from Microsoft at 2010, and after, doing so much and working with some of the smartest people in the world, turning to writing and turning to storytelling. What is that for you? Well, the first thing I turned to was going from being a person who's trying to maximize a business to being a person who's trying to help make things better around him on a full-time basis. And so that meant getting involved with a number of nonprofits and doing those things. But I also found that for my own personal fulfillment, I needed a creative outlet. I needed to explore a side of my life that, I just hadn't been able to do when I was working 100, hours at Microsoft, right? I mean, you don't have the time to do that. So I wrote a nonfiction book called Xbox Revisited, which is a business strategy book about that 3P framework that we talked about. Right. Really nice book, very good business strategy book, loved writing it. And when it came time to write a second book, I said, no, I'm not going to do nonfiction. I want to do fiction. I want to challenge myself to learn about character development and dialogue and scene description and plot. And because I love thrillers, I'm going to write a thriller. And I'm not going to a camp. I'm not going to let anybody teach me. I'm just going to start. And in the fall of 2016, I started. And this is the book that is coming out literally in a week, right? That's correct. Yeah, the book comes out on October 12th. It's called The Watts Insurrection. It's a contemporary thriller. It's about what's going on in our world today. And it has all the elements of plot twists and fast pace that a thriller you'd expect. And, I think has a level of creativity and innovation in it that I'm actually really proud of. I'm excited to have people read it. So 4 years later, or 5 years later almost, right, for writing this book and putting it out, does it feel anywhere the same as the release of either of the Xbox versions, or is this completely different? No, it has some elements that are the same, and there's some elements that are different. Look,
Right.
Xbox was at a scale, and my job was managing a big team and trying to help the whole team get that done. This is different. I mean, I'm the chief marketing officer. I'm the chief development officer.
Yes.
I'm the part of the product. That part is very different. What's the same is that anticipation of not knowing how people are going to react.
Right.
Are people going to love what you created, or are they not going to love what you created? And that is a fascinating process. And we're just now starting to get early reviews of Watts Insurrection. Thankfully, people are really liking it, so I'm happy about that. But that tension is there, and it was there with Xbox. Boy, 2 months before we launched, we weren't sure A, that we were going to finish, and B, that anybody was going to like the result. And it turned out Halo was incredible. And that it has in common for sure.
100%. A bit of a personal question. How did you reach this conviction that this is something that you want to do? So I think one of the things that fascinated me about leaders is sometimes their ability to distill their, intrinsic motivation and who they really are, and very intentionally pursuing that. Now, you were, in the business world, president within Microsoft. You were, writing a nonfiction book on strategy from Stanford Business School earlier on. How do you get to a point where you say, you know what? Now I'm going to do something for me, something that is not as business oriented. I'm going to write a thriller. How does that happen?
Well, for me, I think it stems from one very important fundamental belief, which I think the life journey we're on is about continuously trying to learn and continuously trying to explore new talents, new skills. I never use the word retired, ever. It's just not a word that's in my vocabulary. I say I left Microsoft, but I don't say I retired. I still work hard. I'm a really hard worker. I enjoy working. So, for me, the book had two purposes. One was that it was an amazing learning process. And two, if you have a chance to read it, and as others have a chance to read it, you'll discover that it's not actually that far away from some of the civic things that I talk about and some of the other work that I do. And it's a hardcore contemporary thriller. And I hope when you're finished with it, you also say, oh, I learned something along the way too. That to me is the ultimate challenge and was what I set out to try to achieve.
I love it. Robbie, take me back to your childhood. Early on, elementary school, middle school, pre-Xbox, pre-Microsoft, pre-Stanford. What are you what fascinates you? What sparks your curiosity as a kid?
The things I think the things that fascinated me were twofold. One, I positively loved to read, and I read a lot. I read every Hardy Boys book. There was like 56 of them at the time. I read in middle school a lot about World War II and history. I love history. And so I have continued that passion for history and reading and learning. So that's one thing. And the second thing I loved is I loved any form of sports. And so I played all sports.
Wow.
And, so I had sort of these two sides. I had this sort of, sit and read for 3 hours and then, go play competitive tennis, which, I ended up playing tennis in college, right? So those two things have always been kind of a part of my life. And it started when I was super young.
I love it. And if you had to look today at what is really guiding your inspiration through either the civic engineering, the work that you do as a novelist, the storytelling, what is really, a North Star of inspiration for you?
The thing that for me is inspirational is actually observing others who are able to make a difference. I do a lot of work with an organization called Boys and Girls Clubs of America, which is an amazing organization, serves about 4 million kids in the country, mostly kids who don't have a place to go. And what inspires me is watching not only the amazing things that the kids do, and the kids are truly pretty impressive, but the staff people who enable that to happen and the volunteer hours that go into making that happen it's awesome. It's awesome. And it makes me say, hey, I got to do more. I watch what the outcome of that work, and I watch what these people do who don't get paid as much money as they probably deserve, and yet they're so passionate about the cause. That to me is, to your word, it's inspirational.
I love it. And if you had to choose a few words that you would use to define yourself, what would they be?
I wouldn't be truthful if I didn't use the word competitive. I am a really, really competitive person. So I try to hide that as best I can, but I'd be lying if I didn't include that as one of the 3 words. So that's the first one. The second thing is I've discovered over time that my brain works in a strategic way. And when I'm faced with a problem, my first approach is to step back and try to think, okay, what's the strategy that we have to do? Which is ironic because I did that first Xbox without any strategy, and I think somehow that has seeped into my DNA. And the third thing I'll say is I'm committed. I don't do things sort of half-assed. That's just not in my nature. And so when I do something, it's like this book. If I'm going to write a book, I'm in, and I got to make it happen.
Amazing. I love it. Robbie, thank you so much. This was inspiring. This was so interesting, and I can't wait to obviously read the book and to share this episode. I love the journey. I love the insights. I love the authenticity and the honesty, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for everything. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Hey, you too. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Robbie. Take care.